Hello and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm Brian Phillips, Chief Communications Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and with me as always is our Vice President of Policy, Derek Cohen. Hey Derek, how's the session going so far?
I miss sleep. I miss sleep.
I was going to ask you about that. Just get the grind. You see people on Twitter, or you hear people talking about it in emails and all that about the grind of session. Mm-hmm. What is it? I mean, for those, even though I'm around it and everything, I don't actually go up to the Capitol near as much as you guys. But you guys are like burning holes in your shoes, heading up there, and I see people walk in front of our building all the time. Like, what's that grind like?
Well, to be honest with you, it's not terrible if you know what to expect and how to manage it. But essentially, it is basically the aggregate of, early committee hearings in the morning that end early and sometimes roll over until after the floor session. Really long, drawn-out floor sessions, oftentimes with, some noted fights on the floor. Mm-hmm. And then once they adjourn, they go to the afternoon sessions. And I just,
those can become the evening and the early morning sessions.
Absolutely. And yesterday, just for example, we were, monitoring, the Senate floor. They were talking about the D.E.I. bill. Mm-hmm. Also, yesterday the USA played Mexico in international friendly, and we had some folks over at the building just to watch it while some of the committees were going on. And after that game was over, around 11:15 p.m., just channel over to the House hearings and State Affairs, and Brent's talking about the grid, and I was like, well, that kind of illustrates what we're looking at here.
Kind of sums up a full day for folks up at the Capitol. So
there's only 4 of them a week. So.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the good news is that if in order to refresh, from the tough grind, today is officially State Puppy Day or something up at the state capitol, where they have a bunch of, I guess it's for for adoption awareness or something like that. Did you have a chance to go and rejuvenate yourself with by petting some puppies?
No. As much as I would have loved to, though, had a meeting of the Judicial Advisory Council this morning, so had to do a bit of a shuttle run from here to the Court of Criminal Appeals and back, and I did notice them, and I think they're doing it in conjunction with Capitol Staff Appreciation Day.
Okay.
So they're setting up a little area for food, and I think that that kind of really sums up life inside the Capitol when to show Capitol Staff Appreciation, you let them love on some cuddly puppies. I think that's necessary this time of the
so cuddly puppies and maybe a margarita or a glass of wine or something to show some appreciation.
I can't speak to the latter, but I can speak to the puppies.
All right, so let's get into the show. As always, like to do a little bit of housekeeping, a little promotion from some products that we like to promote here on our podcast. A couple things. One, I always say this every week, but our weekly newsletter that goes out every Thursday called The Post. You can find it at texaspolicy.com/The Post. It's a culmination of all the things that we work on every day. So we don't get to every issue here on the podcast every week, but we do like to touch on most things in the newsletter. So go to texaspolicy.com/The Post and sign up for that to stay on top of everything. We're also excited to launch a new product. I think late last week we started a new video series with our CEO, Greg Sindelar, where he's going to be able to sit down and do in-depth discussion with policymakers. And so it is creatively called Policymakers with Greg Sindelar. The first one is already out, so you can go to our YouTube page and you can see that. He sits down with Representative Tom Oliverson. Representative Oliverson has been in the middle of a number of big debates. Probably the singular one most has been the gender modification. He's got the bill that's moving and is the speaker priority in the House. But he's been in the middle of lots of other issues. But the first half of it, we sit down and actually get to know the person a little bit and kind of what motivates them to be a lawmaker and to get into policy. So we're very excited about that new product. So you can again see that on our YouTube page, and we'll have those out fairly regularly with him. And then finally, this week I recorded a new podcast on my personal podcast on Brian's Breakdown, talking about the package of bills, border security bills, that is moving through the Capitol, both on the House and the Senate side. I sat down with Josh Trevino, who's one of our senior folks here, and he kind of walked us through some of the bills and kind of what's behind that and where they're all going. So please check that out. Again, that's on our YouTube page and on your various podcast subscribing services. All right, so later on in the show, we're going to go in-depth into some new polling. We got our new poll back and want to talk a little bit about that border security package that's going through the House and kind of where the Texans are on those issues. So we'll talk about that a little bit later in the show. Our top topics are going to be kind of the legislation that's being hit this week, explicit materials in libraries. There's been a lot of movement on that legislation. The Death Star bill, which I will let Derek talk about in depth. Eliminating DEI on public universities was this week, and then we'll get into some election integrity, some election reforms a little bit later. But first, of course, as always, we want to get into our Ledgeland update with what's going on. First, I want to just ask you, tell us a little bit about progress in both the House and the Senate. There's kind of some barbs being thrown back about who's moving faster than who, the House versus the Senate. Is that a real debate? Is that a real controversy? And if so, what does it mean in terms of the Senate being ahead of the House?
Right. Is it a real controversy? Yes. Is it one that is largely avoidable? That, I think, is the open question. I'm not really sure how the House could be more expeditious. It would have to do something along the lines of being a lot more tight with some of the chairmanships or some of the chairmen allowing testimony to run long, just having, sampled most of the House committees so far this year. A lot of the chairmen are letting the public speak. And, that is to be lauded, but there's a downside effect, and that is that, when I'm channeling over at 11:30 at night, that we're still in those hearings. Obviously, the Senate is a much more deliberative body. They debate in committees tend to be a little more staid and a little quicker. But they also have
just less members, right? Isn't that probably a
there's less members, less bills, and that is certainly something. And fewer committees, not this massive funnel that everything gets kind of lumped in before they go to the floor. In the calendars committee, they don't have a functional equivalent, at least in the process they do in the House. But that being said, the Senate is just with its own internal makeup is just easier to run. And that's not to say it's easy to run by any means. I'm sure I'm sure herding 31 cats versus 149 cats is equally as difficult as the first cat out of the bag, as it were. But that being said, is the Senate, both chambers create their own rules and how they go about business. And the Lieutenant Governor named his top 30 items, put bill numbers on them, said what they will do, and has internally prioritized them. Again, the Speaker has done that as well, again, specifically in items like technology, school content standards. But even when having declared something one of his priorities, the usual friction, procedural headwinds, being what they are, plus the very formalized process we have in the House, it's no surprise that's why that it's taking longer. Now, at other times, in previous sessions, more bills had been moved at this particular junction, and I think that does bear some mention. But you also have to look at what some of the things that they're working on are. I know they just received and voted out of committee the gender modification bill. So now there are two identical gender modification bills in calendars as we speak. They work that tech agenda. They also have a very robust public and school safety agenda as well. And while the Lieutenant Governor has identified, we want our school safety proposals to contain X, Y, and Z, the Speaker carved out an entire separate committee, sent a lot of that stuff there. Now, the problem, of course, though, is it borrows, as I mentioned before, it borrows from the Public Safety Committee. A lot of the members overlap with the Community Safety Committee.
Right.
And so you can only set so many days where, people can only go so many sleepless nights and then still come back to kick out some bills. So that tends to be the problem is, again, I think there is especially with some of the heavier stuff, the school and community safety stuff, there is this impetus to really give it a full hearing. And in doing so, that is a substantial investment of time.
It reminds me a little bit of early on in the presidential contest and like a presidential, race when those things start getting heated up. There's so little to measure, right? There's so little to evaluate in terms of, what's being passed or how, the kind of progress that's being made, that this idea that we're going to count count bills that we voted through. It seems almost a little arbitrary in terms of it's creating controversy, but they've got to cover something, and they've got to create some, they meaning it could be the media, it could be just pundits, could be the House and Senate members themselves or the leadership thereof. But there isn't much to evaluate necessarily. And so this idea that like, oh, we're ahead of you or we're behind you, I guess it is significant in terms of the pace and kind of where we are, between now and sine die. But it's really just sort of a manufactured kind of controversy. I mean, at the end of the day, everybody expects all the major legislation and all the major issues to get addressed, get to the floor, get to the various, get the various votes, the respective votes they need, and then ultimately get something to the governor.
All legislative controversies outside of a very few, and some that are fairly ascendant at the moment, are manufactured controversies.
But that does bring up this issue of pace does in fact feed into whether or not we're going to have special sessions, right, or a special session. Right now, putting on your prognostication hat and putting on your odds making.
Well, I can tell you, I don't think
green eye shade.
The gambling bills aren't going to pass, so I don't think I'm one to put down wagers, man.
But if you could evaluate that right now in terms of this idea that we're getting close to sine die, some things get backed up. We're what are we 30 some odd days now or 40 some odd days? What do you think the prospects are then for a special session, and maybe perhaps what issue do you think would be the reason why we'd have a special session?
Well, and again, I think we need to be very sober the way we look at this. I think there's only a handful of issues that, if unaddressed, would force the governor to call a special session, and he's been very forthright about this. He mentioned school choice, he mentioned property tax, and a handful of other issues. Then we heard it reported that the lieutenant governor had said, what was it? The quote that he had, that he can't call a special session, but he can force one.
Yeah.
Which, of course, when he said that, I think a lot of people just heard the months of July and August just disappear, like just snap out of existence, like Thanos had something to say about it.
Don't make your summer vacation plans just yet.
Exactly. But that being said, is the incongruence of pace, the fields apart, like we say, we talked weekly about on property taxes. They do not have a good consensus yet, or anywhere close outside of the compression mechanism. But of course, them being different amounts in the compression mechanism because they have the other parts for their particular property tax package. So that's a problem, and that's a problem. That's something that needs to be resolved. I'm fairly confident it will get resolved. Will get resolved in time. I'm hopeful, but I wouldn't think that might be the trigger. Now, school choice, maybe if the you asked me prior that what I thought the prognosis of that is. I'm still very bullish on it. I still think we're going to get. I just give you 80% odds that we're going to get some form of school choice. Now, whether that'll be a good, enough to satisfy the governor, we'll see. But I do think that the movement we've seen thus far, I'm not worried that that'll be resolved, within a year ending in 3. So at the very least, I don't know if that's damning with faint praise or
And you kind of segued into it again, and I wanted to ask you about this too. Is also haven't heard much really on, or at least any movement or any substantive movement on the property tax debate. They've last couple of weeks there certainly have been some bills that were passed, and that's kind of where we're at now. We haven't really seen any movement in terms of, is anything going on behind the scenes that give us any hope that property tax bills might actually get done in the next few weeks? Yeah, no.
This all happens every session. The issue changes and the magnitude of disagreement might change, but the House and the Senate not seeing eye to eye on a particular public policy proposal is nothing new.
And the grandstanding, even from leadership, is nothing new on big issues.
Yeah, and I can absolutely tell you that meetings are going on, some that we've been a part of, in kind of finding that common ground in the middle. And so when you have and again, I don't want to keep going back to the mechanics of these discussions.
It's okay, this is an insider podcast. We can get in the weeds a little bit. So
anyway, let me tell you how buy-down compression works. No. but like at the very least, they agree on and have put several $1 billion towards that buy down mechanism. So the fact that we at least agree that there needs to be some sort of compression of local tax levies, it's a starting point. Now, again, then you have the mechanism of are we going via exemptions, or are we going by valuations? And that's the hard part. Of course, you could do all of them. But of course, that would change the constituent number and how much everybody would benefit in each little particular bucket. But that being said, is that kernel of agreement that A, property taxes are too high, and I think nobody here is disputing that, and B, not only are property taxes too high, but that most of those are being assessed not assessed, but the levy is coming from the local level, and that's why they need to be addressed via compression. That's that foothold that I think they need to actually negotiate. And then you will be surprised when it gets into the conference season. The last week or so of session. People start finding common ground really, really quickly when their voting plans are in jeopardy.
Yeah, because the end of session is a real deadline. Unlike Congress, where we have fake deadlines all the time. Do a 4th of July recess. Oh, we have to do something before. But you're going to be back here in 10 days. There's not a real deadline. But for the state legislature, particularly in Texas, where we only meet every 2 years and for 5 months at a time, these are real deadlines. If you don't get it done, then you got to go home and you got to explain it to your constituents why you didn't do what you said you were going to do. So that is a real deadline, and that is a real motivating factor. All right, so we will keep an eye on property tax as things go through. So I want to get to a few big issues that happened in the last week. I think one of the big floor debates that happened in the House was the bill, what's called the Reader Act. This is Representative Jared Patterson's bill that targets sexually explicit material in public school libraries. So that was a big floor debate. They had a vote on it. I won't give away the big surprise at the end. But why don't you take us through a little bit about how that debate went over that bill?
Well, to be honest with you, I would almost push back on your characterization that it was a big debate. I was shocked, especially after what happened the day prior on preemption, which I'm sure we'll discuss later as well. I was shocked how short of a time that was on the floor for something that they had, basically drummed up to being like, Fahrenheit, 451,
right.
but for school libraries. And again, we don't need to go into the mechanics of the bill too deeply, because obviously what it's sold as and what it actually does is, miles and miles apart. Long story short, what this does is it gives some form of autonomy and control to the parents of a school district, that if there's naughty stuff in their libraries, that there is at least a path and a recourse towards getting that corrected, or at least having a forum in which to do that. We're not just being completely unilaterally subservient to whatever that particular librarian wants to put in there.
Yeah.
Because I don't recall anybody electing that particular librarian, and if they have content standards for themselves, or what they would like to see in schools or elementary schools or middle schools, or see what those kids get exposed to, that's not up to them. That's not what they are. Curating a catalog of materials for sexual exploration, that is going to rub many parents the wrong way.
Absolutely.
And the fact that we are seeing example after example, and some of the things that we've seen tweeted out, just as examples of things that are being found in libraries, I absolutely shocked. We can talk about how the Senate went ahead and banned porn for minors anyway, but now they, but they'll go ahead and defend their ability to get it in a school library, or some people will defend it to get it in a school library. It's just absolutely insane. So like I said, it was up for the first time yesterday. I think it came up around noon or so on the floor, and it was interesting. And there were people. This is not a party line split. I believe the final vote on second reading was 11 Democrats, if I recall correctly.
And that's what I think is the big, the big message out of here is that it ended up being bipartisan. It's only 10 or 11 Democrats, but considering a lot of the bills that have generated controversy, that's a lot.
Yeah, and I have nothing but credit to give Democrat members like Sean Thierry, who, her tweet in defense of her vote was absolutely spot on. It said, look, I voted my district. And then she went on to list the many, many grievances of books that she had seen.
Yeah.
And, that is absolutely laudable. And, we might disagree with Ms. Terry, on a number of issues, and you agree with her on many as well, specifically some of the workforce development ones. But she voted her district, she articulated her vote, and then she stood by it, and that's how this is supposed to work. And then, of course, we've seen the usual. I don't even know it's not the press, but whatever you would consider tabloids. What would you consider Texas Monthly these days?
Yeah, well, it's pretty close. Because propaganda for sure.
Well, we saw their political editor out there, basically rending garments and gnashing teeth about that, saying that the Texas House GOP was just steamrolling through things. I would say I looked at the two different chambers. That was not the wasn't your take. Yeah, it wasn't my take. Again, because they're having these deliberate, sober discussions. But at the end of the day, we talk a lot about school choice because I think math needs some supplementation if you can't count to 76, which seems like a lot of these folks seem to neglect how to do. But I was even, when they rang the bell on that, I was in one of our colleagues' office, and I go, do you think they're going to get 100 on it? And he goes, they might, and they almost did.
Yeah, 92. The thing that there are two things on this bill that I have to highlight. Number one, I mean, you mentioned it a little bit earlier. I'm not sure it was the House or the Senate, but they did take up a bill where it had age restrictions for porn websites, right? So you had to prove that you were over 18 in order to be able to access these sexually explicit websites. I mean, almost every Democrat voted for that.
Everyone did. That was a 31-0 bill in the Senate.
On Tuesday. It was in the Senate. 31-0. The Democrats vote, and yet when it comes to similar sexually explicit material in school libraries, now all of a sudden that's something to defend. And I just don't. I haven't seen. I've been looking, but I've been trying to understand the differences between a minor accessing sexually explicit material online, and then being able to go into a school library and access similar or that same type of material. And so I don't understand the difference. So that's number one. And number two, again, this is something that I talk about on the podcast all the time. So I'll say it again, which is just the bad faith arguments that are being made on the left. And again, I don't understand why. You see the books that they're talking about. I mean, Jerry Patterson has a huge list of books that have material about rapes and incest and all kinds of stuff that I wouldn't want a 10-year-old or 11-year-old to have access to, particularly without their parents' knowledge. And so those are the kinds of materials that they're obviously targeting. And yet these bad faith arguments, oh well, this bill is so broad that it might include The Catcher in the Rye or Ulysses or some of these like classic books. That and even if that's the case, if that is true that you think it's that broad, then fine, work to fix the bill. But making that argument as a reason to vote against the bill rather than working to make it better, and at least agreeing that we have a real issue with sexually explicit material ending up in public school libraries available to kids that shouldn't be available to them without their parents' knowledge. They won't even acknowledge that that's a real issue here in Texas, despite all of the evidence that it's true.
But this reflects kind of the national political alignment more broadly, wherein party Democrats are more of a broad coalition of fairly disparate interests, I would say. And when you have the individual who got their master's degree in library studies and says, no, we need these in schools because that's all they know is basically having the library is the sole font of knowledge within the public education system or what have you, then that's a member of the coalition who needs to get defended. But obviously, as we've seen, I think there was again like 11 Democrats who said that the hell it is. And again, this it got painted as this is we're going to start the bonfires, go grab the books, go grab Lonesome Dove or whatever it is, and on it goes. But it's like that's not even indicative of how the actual bills, and I mean like stuff as far as like the actual retailers or the people that sell the book to the libraries have to have some sort of flag on it if it has that kind of content in it. If you're against content transparency, I just don't know if there's any talking to these people at this point.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's one thing that the bill does is it does put the onus on the people who are providing these materials to have some kind of check on their side to say, well, we saw something in this book. At the very least, should be able to flag it for administrators and school officials to say, okay, let's check it out and make sure that it meets our standard for a public library. So anyway. anyway, glad to see that some Democrats did cross the party line and vote for the bill. So it's now in the House, make its way into the Senate, and potentially be moving there pretty soon. Mm-hmm. All right. So second issue, and I'll just let you go ahead and set this one up. Tell us about the Death Star bill.
Yeah, so this is just basically a construction code regulation on exhaust ports. Very very susceptible to proton torpedoes, as you know.
That is an inside Star Wars joke. I don't know that I even got that.
Yeah, I will not. I won't stop, Brian. I will nerd out on Star Wars whenever given the opportunity. But all that kidding. It was called you mentioned Death Star is a joke, but that's how I believe it was discussed in the Houston Chronicle, if I recall.
Yeah, the Regulatory Consistency Act is what it's technically called, but they called it the Death Star bill.
Yeah, well, they called it the Death Star because they were saying, oh, this is like the thing that's going to just destroy everything, because the parade of horribles that people have identified as what this bill would preempt. Basically, it's a field preemption. So
take us through it real quick.
Sure. So this bill's been around for at least through 2 prior legislative sessions, if not 3. Mm-hmm. And what this seeks to do is have the most core elements of a business's vitality, a livelihood. Basically have those being routine and predictable, whether you're in Harris County or Hudspeth County or Travis County or Titus County. They're all going to be the same. Whereas if the state has a particular regulation on an area, then that's the controlling regulation. We see everything from, the locals had tried to make, gun-free zones in places that weren't eligible to be that. They were trying to...
Well, just right now, San Antonio is about to go and try and make abortion illegal for San Antonio. There's a Proposition A or whatever that's going to be voted on next month to make abortion legal in San Antonio when clearly there's state law against it.
Allow me to quibble. They would say, oh, no, we're just diverting all of our enforcement efforts and mechanisms to other things, which, of course, I mean, that'd be great. But, last time I checked, it's not that crime in San Antonio is far suppressed because than it is here. Same thing, because it's we have these liberal DAs that again are going to address this particular legislative session. But all that to say, it's the same thing when they tried to do that with Austin and marijuana, and they had that ballot initiative like, we're going to enforce every this is the last thing that we will enforce as a matter of prioritization. Well, and of course I pointed out, I was like, Pat, congrats to Weedle Lobby, pats on your back. But, also people that, well, now officially DPS patrols Austin, whereas before they still had jurisdiction there but didn't have an active patrol presence. ISD police, they happen to find a little bit of weed in schools nowadays, believe it or not.
But anyway, back to the bill.
Yeah, all that to say is basically when they're trying to do that, they're trying to basically circumvent or nullify state policy, or adding on additional onerous layers of state policy, whatever. So whether it's the hiring process and what you can ask in an interview, or whether how you regulate certain businesses, even though many businesses have been carved out of that, including from puppy mills to certain sexually explicit businesses, or I'm sorry, sexually oriented businesses, those, a lot of those have been grandfathered in. But essentially says, look, if we have regulation at the state in whatever area this might be, we are going to, the state one's going to prevail.
That's going to be the consistent law of the land, so that when you open up, when you try to expand your business from San Antonio to Austin to Dallas or to Lubbock, you're not having to deal with 50 different types of regulations based on where it is that you happen to open up your business.
But like, again, the pushback, and this, I believe it was, who was the particularly clownish group that was, I think it was the AFL-CIO, and their big pushback was, well, this is going to ban water breaks. It's going to ban water. So in other words, we'd be breaking the law once this bill passes because we're drinking water, which as you know is within the purview of state regulation. But no, their tortured logic to get there is the city or municipality can't mandate water breaks for for the employees. The employees can still have water breaks. In fact, good luck trying to actually keep people on a construction site, especially with this current hiring environment, if you're not offering the basic human dignity of a water break.
Right.
What you can't do is say with Austin and the paid sick leave and things like that you can actually dictate how a company runs its actual employment operations,
right?
Because you happen to be a progressive city council that's been captured by just a radical fringe.
Part of this is cities for over the past 2 or 3 years. I mean, especially, and I don't know why many cities in Texas want to do this, but apparently they look at what's going on in places like San Francisco and LA and Chicago and think, yeah, that's what we should be doing. And so whether it's the homeless explosion of the homeless population in Austin the last 2 or 3 years because of their policies on ending the camping ban, which I personally lived through, living downtown and watching it totally explode and become completely unsafe to walk 6 blocks in downtown. Thank goodness we finally reversed it, but it took 2 years. I mean, just watching that one issue alone, you think, who are these idiots that are running the city council and and mayor and all of that, creating these public safety issues, unnecessarily. And so you've got public safety problems. You obviously have, regulations on businesses that are making it harder for them to keep their doors open and to hire people. And they look at places like San Francisco and LA and Chicago and think, oh yeah, these are the bastions of what we want to become. The vast majority of Texans don't want to be San Francisco or Chicago. And the idea that these cities would make those kinds of changes or make those kinds of decisions and that the state legislature would just sit by and let it happen, I think is really absurd. I think it's, look, they've brought it upon themselves. Like you said, this has been something that has been pitched and discussed the last 2 or 3 sessions. And because of the activities of these left-wing crazy city councils and mayors, it has become such an issue that now, it is an idea for whose time has come. And that's why it was debated. And I think that's why it was passed. And so, look, I think you can look at this and think, well, local government, why aren't they able to make, their own decisions based on, what their communities want, what their communities need, which I don't think, to your point, that they're stopping them from doing. I think that communities can still continue to make decisions. You just can't go outside the parameters of what the state says is acceptable because we're trying to make sure that there's a consistency from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and also that the public is not put in any kind of jeopardy or any kind of harm because of cutting police funding or letting the homeless population explode. So anyway, any more on that from the legislature perspective as it goes to the Senate now, I guess?
No, yeah, I think that also, much like you had with the Reader Act, you had several Democrats on that as well, and I think the margin as a percentage of the caucus over in the Senate will probably be even greater who signed onto that bill.
Okay, so I want to get to kind of our last issue that we'll talk about in top topics is the elimination of D.E.I. At public universities. We talked about this a little bit, but it's finally happened. This is the Senate bill, and essentially what it prevents is, I guess it prevents funding for any diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I call division, exclusion, and indoctrination. We've talked about, the debate on this is, I think the left hides behind diversity. Obviously, diversity is a good thing, but what these programs have ultimately become essentially is coercion for a radical leftist ideology and imposing that and indoctrinating that with faculty and with students. The most pernicious of these practices that we've talked about here before are these diversity statements, which basically bar anyone from getting hired into faculty unless you commit yourself to these practices. Now, why a biology teacher or a physics teacher who just wants to teach every one of his students, the principles of science, needs to then commit themselves constantly on this, on this other track to critical race theory or any of these other things? No one knows why that is necessarily an important thing. I think you've got teachers who just want to go in and teach their subject. Why they would have to commit to these diversity statements, no one really knows why, other than they just want want to make sure, the universities want to make sure that they're only hiring one sort of of leftist for these positions. So that has led to, and we've seen studies that have backed this up. That has led to less viewpoint diversity, certainly less discovery, and absolutely less free speech on campus. And so that's what this bill is aimed at fixing. So how did the debate go? And in your mind, do you think this is going to move over in the House?
Yeah, and again, it's the usual straw manning that you've seen, and that this bill says, look, we're outlawing this completely wasteful use of public funds in the university setting for a group of administrators who have absolutely no portfolio and no real KPIs to the value that they add to the educational process. Saying that, look, those days are done. If you want to seek, diversity, you should do that. What you don't need is a 100 administrator department in which to do it.
Right.
And that's essentially the problem. This does not affect the actual criteria of admission or anything like that. But what this says is you basically can't have these make-work sinecures for people that do not otherwise contribute to the mission of a university. And, that's something that should be lauded, because we've seen, the absolute skyrocketing of the cost to educate a young adult. At this point, we're talking to universities. And I wouldn't say all of it, but a great deal of that is driven by administrative bloat. This is the kind of stuff that drives administrative bloat. Now, there's other, we'll call them student affairs personnel, at least as we called it affectionately back in Bowling Green, because the school that produced a lot of those folks who, again, their ambit within the entire higher education structure is the student experience. Mm-hmm. The student's experience should be to learn what he or she has decided to major in and excel and master that particular coursework, not whether or not they feel the lazy river is inclusive enough.
Well, and to that point, we're now starting to see some evaluations of DEI programs, and it's only really started. We've started to see some reports and other research that's come out that if the idea is that DEI programs are supposed to improve diversity for the purposes of making people feel included and not excluded, the reality is it doesn't work, because again, we've got reports that have come out that we've talked about before, where they've surveyed the student body, and they've asked them what issues are the most difficult to talk about, and race relations and racial issues are the number one most difficult to talk about, and that's increased over the last 4 or 5 years that these DEI programs have exploded all across the country. Well,
and not only that, but it all kind of belies, well, if you have an underprivileged class, then it makes logical sense that obviously you would want to help afford themselves access to a college degree, because as we all know, a college degree means higher income. But the problem is, and this I got to point to the work of our own Andrew Gillen on this, because he's written about this extensively, is that you don't a college degree per se is not what causes that increase in lifetime earning. There are a lot of well-credentialed baristas out there, but they also lump in a lot of the folks who are doctors and lawyers and have really high-end terminal degrees. They would still be in that set versus the folks who say went into the trades, and like I said, I know for a fact that there are friends of mine who graduate high school with me who are who went into the trades and are doing quite well from themselves, making, well in excess of, what we make, even though, I have several college degrees. And again, because it's not the college degree in and of itself that actually leads to the income and earnings potential. It's how you use it. We could give everybody
skills and all of that. Yeah.
We can give everybody tomorrow a paper that says you've completed all prerequisites in the field of underwater basket weaving, and it would not at all change the dynamic of the workforce unless we have a great underwater basket weaver shortage. And then in which I withdraw. But that being said, is again, college is not for everyone, as we've said. This is something that is basically a sandcastle built on top of that.
I would question the structural integrity of a basket that was weaved underwater, for starters.
Well, the old joke is that was one of the most prevalent majors of Ohio State football players. So there's other there's other structural issues with that I would call into question as well.
Of course, now that's a good example because most of them are all millionaires because they go to the NFL because they have such a good football team. Okay.
They go to the NFL as millionaires too, but we can talk about that later.
So, all right. So in the last few minutes, I want to discuss, we talked about the border security package last week that's moving through the House and the Senate, package of bills. And so we do a lot of polling here. It's one of my favorite subjects. I talk about it all the time. We've got some results back I want to share with you and get your feedback on this. So there's a couple of bills. The two most controversial ones we'll start with, which are HB 20, which is the bill that creates the Border Protection Unit. We asked people, they support or oppose that. The Border Protection Unit got 60% support of Texans, and this is Texas registered voters all across Texas. So 60% of Texans support the Border Patrol unit, and just 29% oppose it. And then the second one I'll mention is HB 1600, which makes it a state offense to illegally enter Texas. That was 61% support, while 33% oppose. Again, a 2-to-1 in favor of both of those bills, and those are the ones that get the most attention. Why do you think Texans are supporting those two bills?
It's almost like you're trying to tell me that Twitter is not real life.
It is not. It is, in fact, not.
Because I think, to be honest with you, and this goes to a conversation that I had, this was back in October of last year, which had somebody visiting from out of town, and I was telling her, she was asking, from Chicago, and was asking about border relations and things like that. And I made the remark, I go, a Valley Democrat, at least kind of speaking in generalities, but a Valley Democrat today is going to be more hawkish on border questions than many middle of the pack, conservative Republicans, just because of the lived experience that they have going on down there. And I think that, once, a lot of the border issues don't make national news all that much. I mean, obviously, if
the big numbers do, right?
Yeah,
when the new numbers come out every month, it's like, oh, we've had more than last month.
It'll get its play on Fox, or the folks on the right trot that out, and folks on the left say, look, kids in cages again. Can you believe Trump's doing this, even though he hasn't been elected for 2.5 years? But yeah, it's one of these things where it's a real issue to people that have to live it, or people that are close to border regions and see it, and they say and I think that it's opening the tolerance of some of the respondents here are getting from the I have a suite of policy proposals I would like to see enacted to just do something at this point.
Right.
If you want to fill it with sharks with lasers, fill the river with sharks with lasers on their head. That's almost preferable to the status quo, which is absolutely nothing.
And to your earlier point about those communities, 55% of Hispanics did support the Border Protection Unit as well. And I think that's because we're fed up. I mean, Texans are fed up. Policymakers are fed up. Certainly, the border communities are fed up, waiting for something to happen. Waiting for the federal government to show up when it is clear that they're not sending help and they're not doing anything substantive. The other big controversial issue, which we tested, was whether or not it would qualify as an invasion. And we've talked about what the invasion definition means here. Maybe some people understand it, maybe they don't. But at any rate, now fully a majority of Texans say that the crisis has reached the point that it could be called an invasion. That's 53%. That is up from 45% last fall. So you're seeing some significant movement in the direction of wanting to declare it an invasion, which we've talked about opens up new authorities and new tactics and tools for the governor to use.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that some of the nuances lost there on the definitional, what an invasion is versus what the popular conception. But that almost proves the point, is the fact that, we're saying it's ingress plus enmity, and then we're describing it in a way of, well, this is how certain actions can be taken in order to arrest that situation. Meanwhile, again, people are not sitting here looking at the law of armed conflict and going, this actually is a good one. But the UCMJ then says this.
Yeah, right.
And, they're not looking at that. They're going, I'm fed up. We're getting, all sorts of quality of life issues, not only down on the border, but throughout the entire state because of this. We just need that situation solved. And these are people that I would bet on, asking in parallel immigration questions are all over the board. You probably have folks that are immigration hawks, and then you probably have people that are definitely like, well, throw open the gates, just make sure they check in on the way in. But again, they're like, but this whole, unsolicited, unsecure situation needs to stop.
So the last two that I'll mention that I'll get your opinions on are Texans want Texas to go after the real villains here. And the real villains here obviously are the cartels who are doing the drug smuggling, who are doing the human smuggling, and then also the corrupt officials over in Mexico. I mean, at this point, we all know it's almost an open secret that the Mexican government officials and elites over there are working hand in hand with the cartels to scratch each other's back. And Texans want our laws. If the federal government's not going to do this job, the Texans want our laws to be able to target and to eliminate the activity of the cartels. Specifically, 78% said that we should be targeting corrupt Mexican elites and other corrupt and dangerous foreign nationals doing business here inside of Texas. So that 78% say that we should be able to go after, to collect their assets, to prevent them from doing financial transactions with our banks. I mean, cut off their lifelines to money and resources that are on this side of the border. The other one is 80% want to see higher penalties for drug and human smugglers. I don't know who the 20% are or however many it is who don't want to see higher penalties for drug and human smugglers. Maybe the cartels and their families that are already over here. But nevertheless, what it says is that there is a push to say, look, we need to throw the book. We need to go after the people who are responsible for this, and they want to see aggressive and immediate action.
Yeah, and I think again, when you start talking about the spreads on those, that quickly becomes not a partisan issue.
Absolutely.
And, when it comes to the enabling of the cartels and the elites, and I know there's many mechanisms by which we actually discuss that, whether or not it's talking about the way we constitute our organized crime statutes so that actions of a cartel would then count similar to the actions of, like, say, a street gang. That'd be one action. But then we also talk about the angle list, which would basically be starting a state registry of these people that have been found, with due process, of course, to have been, involved with the cartels and with the illicit drug or human trade, and then having basically a prohibition to, against that. And of course, how was this reported in the news? GOP files bills to basically start a hot war with Mexico, and again, it's not anything like that. In fact, I believe if you ask anybody that voted in the 80% or what have you, they would say, no, we would want a partnership, a functional, bilateral partnership with Mexico on this, because we're not going to, we can only do so much stuff from this side of the river. There's only so much that we can do. But that being said, is if we had a cooperative partner across the river, then we could do a whole lot more that wouldn't require so much stuff being done on this side. However, this is the only side that we are left with any form of control over. And, Mexico, obviously, both at the, the state and federal level, has not been a very cooperative partner. We could go, I'm sure Josh, when he was on your podcast, talked a whole bunch about how AMLO came in as one thing and is going out as something else.
Right.
So, yeah, I'll leave that to that podcast. But needless to say is we don't have a credible partner on the other side. So this is all basically what we have to do.
I think in just writ large, what it says is, Texans, policymakers, the governor, others, agency heads, they have a lot of ground to stand on, particularly with the backing of Texans, to go and be very aggressive, to pass these laws, to make sure that, we have the legal backing for them. All of them, of course, are constitutional, will pass constitutional muster. I'm sure there'll still be some lawsuits, right, particularly over the Border Protection Unit. But at the very least, Texans, they have their back. They have the support from Texans to go and pursue this, to take measures into their own hands, because again, help is not coming from Washington D.C.
Yeah. I just wish they would fight against the cartels as much as they fought against the states trying to fix their own border issues.
All right, so for this podcast, we'll close and we'll leave it there. Again, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. We've been receiving tons of really good feedback on our issues. So again, I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but we talk a lot about Twitter because we're always on Twitter. So you're happy to, you could easily get us there. I'm at Real Bphil and Derek is at Cohen at TPPF. And so if you have any ideas for things we need to talk about, or if you want to give us any constructive feedback on issues, you can find us there. So as always, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And as we like to say, or as I like to always end it with Sam Houston's quote, do good and risk the consequences. We'll see you next time.